Peranakan Chinese and Baba-Nyonya are the descendants of Chinese immigrants who came to the Malay archipelago and British Malaya between the 15th and 17th centuries. Members of this community in Malaysia address themselves as Baba-Nyonya. Nyonya is the term for the women and Baba for the men. It applies especially to the Han populations of the British Straits settlements of Malaya and the Dutch-controlled island of Java and other locations, who have adopted Nusantara customs partially or in full to be somewhat assimilated into the local communities. Many were the elites of Singapore, more loyal to the British than to China. Most have lived for generations along the Straits of Malacca. They were usually traders, the middleman of the British and the Chinese, or the Chinese and Malays, or vice versa because they were mostly English educated. Because of this, they almost always had the ability to speak two or more languages. While the term Peranakan is most commonly used to refer to those of Chinese descent also known as Straits Chinese, there are also other, comparatively smaller Peranakan communities, such as Indian Hindu Peranakans, Arab Indian Muslim Peranakans and Eurasian Peranakans. The group has parallels to the Cambodian Hokkien, who are descendants of Hoklo Chinese, and the Pashu of Myanmar, a Burmese word for the Peranakan or Straits Chinese who have settled in Myanmar. They maintain their culture partially despite their native language gradually disappearing a few generations after settlement. Terminology: in both Malay and Indonesian, the word Peranakan means descendant with no connotation of the ethnicity of descent unless followed by a subsequent qualifying noun, such as for example Peranakan Shayu no Sina, Jori Peranakan, or Peranakan Belanda. Peranakan has the implied connotation of referring to the ancestry of great-grandparents or of more distant ancestors. Peranakan Chinese commonly refer to themselves as Baba-Nyonya. The term Baba is an honorific for Straits Chinese men. It originated as a Hindustani loanword borrowed by Malay speakers as a term of affection for one's grandparents, and became part of the common vernacular. Female Straits Chinese descendants were either called or styled themselves Nyonyas. Nyonya is a Malay and Indonesian honorific used to refer to a foreign married lady. It is a loanword, possibly borrowed from the Italian nonna, or more likely from the Portuguese word for lady dona. Because Malays at that time had a tendency to address all foreign women as Nyonya, they used the term for Straits Chinese women as well. It gradually became more exclusively associated with them. Straits Chinese were defined as those born or living in the Straits settlements, a British colonial construct of Penang, Malacca and Singapore constituted in 1826. Straits Chinese were not considered Baba-Nyonya unless they displayed certain Sino-Malay syncretic attributes. Ancestry: most Peranakans are of Hoklo ancestry, although a sizable number are of Teochew or Hakka descent including a small minority of Cantonese. Baba-Nyonya are a subgroup within Chinese communities. Peranakan families occasionally imported brides from China and sent their daughters to China to find husbands. Intermarriage in Malaysia occurs more frequently between Peranakan and people of Indian Chuti and Sarani ethnicity rather than Malay because of endogamous religious laws. These require non-Muslims intending to marry Malay Muslims first to convert to Islam. Peranakan are not always willing to alter their religious and cultural identity in this way. Language: the language of the Peranakans, Baba Malay, is a Creole language related to the Malay language, which contains many Hokkien words. It is a dying language, and its contemporary use is mainly limited to members of the older generation. Penang Peranakans are heavily influenced by a variant of Hokkien dialect known locally as Penang Hokkien. As for the Malaccan Peranakans, the Peranakan Malay spoken by the community is strongly based on the Malay language as most of them can't speak the language of their Chinese forebears. Whereas in Kelantan, the Peranakans are known to not only speak a Hokkien version of their own but also the Kelantanese Malay dialect and Thai. In Indonesia, the Peranakan language is mainly based on Bahasa Indonesia and Javanese language that is mixed with elements of Chinese language, mostly Hokkien dialect. Speakers of the Peranakan language can be found scattered along the northern coastline area throughout West Java, Central Java and East Java, and also in special region of Yogyakarta, Indonesia. young Peranakans can still speak this Creole language, although its use is limited to informal occasions. Today, young Peranakans especially have lost much of their traditional language. Therefore, that has resulted a difference in vocabulary between the older and younger generation, especially now that English and Mandarin has replaced Peranakan Malay as the main language spoken amongst the younger generation. History. The first Chinese immigrants to settle in the Malay archipelago arrived from Guangdong and Fujian provinces in the 10th century CE. They were joined by much larger numbers of the Chinese in the 15th through 17th centuries, following on the heels of the Ming Emperor's reopening of Chinese-Malay trade relations in the 15th century. In the 15th century, some small city-states of the Malay Peninsula often paid tribute to various kingdoms such as those of China and Siam. Close relations with China were established in the early 15th century during the reign of Parameswara, when Admiral Zheng He, a Muslim Chinese, visited Malacca and Java during his expedition. According to a legend in 1459 CE, the Emperor of China sent a princess, Hang Li Po, to the Sultan of Malacca as a token of appreciation for his tribute. The nobles and servants who accompanied the princess initially settled in Bukit Sina and eventually grew into a class of Straits-born Chinese known as the Peranakans. Due to economic hardships at mainland China, waves of immigrants from China settled in Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore. Some of them embraced the local customs, while still retaining some degree of their ancestral culture. They are known as the Peranakans. Peranakans normally have a certain degree of indigenous blood, which can be attributed to the fact that during Imperial China, most immigrants were men who married the local women. Peranakans at Tangerang, Indonesia, held such a high degree of indigenous blood that they are almost physically indistinguishable from the local population. Peranakans at Indonesia can vary between very fair to copper tan in color. Chinese men in Malacca fathered children with Javanese, Batak and Balinese slave women. Their descendants moved to Penang and Singapore during British rule. Chinese men in colonial Southeast Asia also obtained slave wives from Nias. Chinese men in Singapore and Penang were supplied with slave wives of Bugis, Batak, and Balinese origin. The British tolerated the importation of slave wives since they improved the standard of living for the slaves and provided contentment to the male population. The usage of slave women or housemaids as wives by the Chinese was widespread. It cannot be denied, however, that the existence of slavery in this quarter, in former years, was of immense advantage in procuring a female population for Penang. From Asaban alone, there used to be sometimes 300 slaves, principally females, exported to Malacca and Penang in a year. The women get comfortably settled as the wives of opulent Chinese merchants, and live in the greatest comfort. Their families attach these men to the soil. And many never think of returning to their native country. The female population of Penang is still far from being upon a par with the male. And the abolition therefore of slavery, has been a vast sacrifice to philanthropy and humanity. As the condition of the slaves who were brought to the British settlements, was materially improved, and as they contributed so much to the happiness of the male population, and the general prosperity of the settlement, I am disposed to think, that the continuance of the system here could not, under the benevolent regulations which were enforced to prevent abuse, have been productive of much evil. The sort of slavery indeed which existed in the British settlements in this quarter, had nothing but the name against it. For the condition of the slaves who were brought from the adjoining countries, was always ameliorated by the change. They were well fed and clothed. The women became wives of respectable Chinese. And the men who were in the least industrious, easily emancipated themselves, and many became wealthy. Severity by masters was punished. And, in short, I do not know any race of people who were, and had every reason to be, so happy and contented as the slaves formerly, and debtors as they are now called, who came from the east coast of Sumatra and other places. John Anderson, agent to the government of Prince of Wales Island. Peranakans themselves later on migrated between Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore, which resulted in a high degree of cultural similarity between Peranakans in those countries. Economic/educational reasons normally propel the migration of Peranikans between the Nusantara region. Their Creole language is very close to the indigenous languages of those countries, which makes adaptations a lot easier. In Indonesia, a large population of Peranikans can be found in Tangerang, West Java. People of Chinese ancestry in Phuket, Thailand make up a significant population, many of whom having descended from tin miners who migrated to the island during the 19th century. The Peranikans there are known as Phuket Barbers in the local tongue, constitute a fair share of members' Chinese community, particularly among those who have family ties with the Peranikans of Penang and Malacca. For political reasons Peranikans and other Nusantara Chinese are grouped as a one-racial group, Chinese, with Chinese in Singapore and Malaysia becoming more adoptive of mainland Chinese culture, and Chinese in Indonesia becoming more diluted in their Chinese culture. Such things can be attributed to the policies of Bumiputera and Chinese national schools, mother tongue policy and the ban of Chinese culture during the Suharto era in Indonesia. In old times the Peranikans were held in high regard by Malays. Some Malays in the past may have taken the word barber, referring to Chinese males, and put it into their name, when this used to be the case. This is not followed by the younger generation, and the current Chinese Malaysians do not have the same status or respect as Peranikans used to have. Culture = clothing =. The Peranakan retained most of their ethnic and religious origins, but assimilated the language and culture of the Malays. The Nyanya's clothing, baju panjang, was adapted from the native Malays baju kurung. It is worn with a batik sarong and 3 kerisang. Peranakan beaded slippers called kasut maink were handmade with much skill and patience, strung, beaded and sewn onto canvas with tiny faceted glass-cut beads from Bohemia. Traditional kasut maink design often have European floral subjects, with colors influenced by Peranakan porcelain and batik sarongs. They were made into flats or bedroom slippers. But from the 1930s, modern shapes became popular and heels were gradually added. In Indonesia, the Peranikans developed their own kebaya, most notably kebaya enkim, derived from the name enkim or insi to refer to a married Chinese woman. Kebaya enkim was commonly worn by Chinese ladies in Javan coastal cities with significant Chinese settlements, such as Semarang, Lasem, Tuban, Surabaya, Pekalongan and Cirebon. It marked differently from Javanese kebaya with its smaller and finer embroidery, lighter fabrics and more vibrant colors. They also developed their own batik patterns, which incorporate symbols from China. The kebaya enicm fit well with vibrant colored cane batik pasajiran, which incorporated symbols and motifs from China, such as dragon, phoenix, peony and lotus. For the barber they will wear baju lokchuan, but the younger generation they will wear just the top of it, which is the long-sleeved silk jacket with Chinese collar or the batik shirt. Religion Most Peranakans generally subscribed to Chinese belief systems such as Taoism, Confucianism and Chinese Buddhism. Just like the Chinese, the Peranakans also celebrate Lunar New Year, Lantern Festival and other Chinese festivals, while adopting the customs of the land they settled in, as well as those of their colonial rulers. There are traces of Portuguese, Dutch, British, Malay and Indonesian influences in Peranakan culture. Just like in any other cultures, the Peranakans still believe in pantang larang, especially among the older generations. In some cases, quite a number of the Peranakans' pantang larang are deemed too strict and complex. But today, most Peranakans no longer practice complex pantang larang to keep up with the modern times. Christianity. A certain number of Peranakan families were and still are Catholic. Some families also became Protestants, with Methodists and Presbyterians numbering among them, from the mid to late 19th century. However, in this modern society, many of young Peranakan community have been embracing Christianity. Most notably in Indonesia, a country with the most significant Peranakan where most of the Chinese are Christians. Despite living in Muslim-majority countries such as Indonesia and Malaysia, for Peranakans, converting to Christianity is seen as being more convenient and less problematic in their daily life, such as being allowed to continue eating pork and not having to pray 5 times a day. Islam. In Indonesia, Peranakan, up until the 19th century, referred to all Indonesian Chinese who had converted to Islam. This indicated the importance of Islamic identity as a criterion of indigenization. Later, Peranakan referred to all Indonesian Chinese born in the country, including those of descendants of mixed-race unions. Large numbers of Peranakans, many from Fujian having prior experience with foreign Muslims who had a dominant position in that province's most important seaport, adopted Islam in Java, strongly Muslim areas of Indonesia, and Malaysia. As in the case of the Peranakans in Cirebon, this conversion process occurred over several centuries and was even recorded before the Dutch seized Jakarta. Many of these Peranakans in Indonesia who converted to Islam would marry into aristocratic dynasties. One organization of Indonesian Peranakan Muslims is the Persatuan Islam Shah Uno Indonesia, which was formed in 1936 in Medan. Some prominent Peranakan Muslims include the Indonesians Junus Jaja, Abdul Karim Oait Jinghen and Tjio Waitan from Patani, the Peranakan convert to Islam, Dacu Sirinara, who according to Wibrand of Wawit was the most important commercial and military figure in Patani in 1602. Food. From the Malay influence, a unique Nyanaya cuisine has developed using typical Malay spices. Examples are chicken kapitan, a dry chicken curry, and ingkai kabin, a Nyanaya version of fried chicken. Pindang bandeng is a common fish soup served in Indonesia during the Chinese New Year, and so is a white round mooncake from Tangerang, which is normally used during the autumn festival. Suiki parodadi is a Peranakan dish from Parodadi. It is a frog soup dish. Nyanaya laksa is a very popular dish in Singapore and Malacca, Malaysia, while another variant called Asam laksa is famous in Penang, Malaysia. Pongti is also another popular and savory dish of the Peranakan community. The main ingredient is onion, black mushroom, chicken and fermented bean sauce. The Malaccan Nyanayas are well known for this dish. Other dishes from the Peranakans in Kelantan includes telur Am Kerabu and Korjam are influenced by Chinese, Malay and Thai cuisine. Besides that, Peranakans are also well known for a wide variety of traditional cakes such as Lapak Kakong, Ang Kuku, Ki Thai/Nastar, Nyanaya Bak Chang, Apam Balik, Ki Bakal, Tapi, Ki Kwachai, Ki Bongkong, Rempadang, Pelot Enti, Ki Gulong Semprang, Ki Balu, Galang Galo, Ki Bangkit and many more. Traditional ki are sometimes made in conjunction with festivals that the Peranakans celebrate. For example, ki jenggang is a type of multi-layered cake, most often eaten during Chinese New Year to symbolize a ladder of continued prosperity. A small number of restaurants serving Nyanaya food can be found in Singapore, Penang and Malacca in Malaysia, and Jakarta, Semarang, Surabaya in Indonesia. Marriage. It was not uncommon for early Chinese traders to take Malay women from Peninsular Malaya or Sumatra as wives or concubines. Consequently, the Baba-Nyonya possessed a synergistic mix of Sino-Malay cultural traits. Written records from the 19th and early 20th centuries show that Peranakan men usually took brides from within the local Peranakan community. Peranakan families occasionally imported brides from China and sent their daughters to China to find husbands. Marriages within the community and of similar stature were the norm during that time. Wealthy men prefigured to marry a Chin Kowri, or matrilical marriage where husband moved in with wife's family. Proposals of marriage were made by a gift of a pinangan, in a two-tiered lacquered basket known as bakal syah in Malaysia or tinongka ranjang in Indonesia, to the intended bride's parents brought by a go-between who speaks on behalf of the suitor. There are rare cases where wealthy Peranakans in the past used highly decorative glided pagoda trays instead of the bakal syah or tinongka ranjang. Most Peranakans are not Muslim, and have retained the traditions of ancestor worship of the Chinese, though some converted to Christianity. The wedding ceremony of the Peranakan is largely based on Chinese tradition, and is one of the most colorful wedding ceremonies in Malaysia and Singapore. At weddings, the Dondang Sayang, a form of extempore rhyming song in Malay sung and danced by guests at the wedding party, was a highlight. Someone would begin a romantic theme which was carried on by others, each taking the floor in turn, dancing in slow gyrations as they sang. It required quick wit and repartee and often gave rise to laughter and applause when a particularly clever phrase was sung. The melodic accents of the Baba-Nyonya and their particular turns of phrase lead to the charm of this performance. The important wedding rites had to be commenced on auspicious days at specific times, according to the Pekji, the 8 Chinese characters annotating one's birth date and time. At these rites, pantangs, taboos, were carefully observed. The wedding rituals had to be legitimized and witnessed by elders, deities and ancestors. Marriages were typically match-made. Parents and elders made the final decision, but the potential bride and bridegroom were also consulted in the process. Wedding items commonly utilized the prosperous colors of red, pink, orange, yellow and gold and were embezzled with special motifs to ensure a good marriage. Similar to the Chinese, Peranakans believed that good things always come in pairs, therefore many wedding items came in pairs. Museums. Historical and cultural items from the Peranakan culture are displayed in Baba-Nyonya Heritage Museum, Straits Chinese Jewelry Museum and other cultural establishments on Heron Street, Jonker Street and other streets in the same neighborhood in Malacca. The Penang Peranakan Mansion in Penang, Malaysia. And at the Peranakan Museum, Baba House and the Intan Museum in Singapore. Furniture, food, and even traditional clothes of the Baba-Nyonya are exhibited. Free weekly street shows featuring Baba performances, and traditional and pop Chinese cultural performances are found in Jonker Street in Malacca. The shows are part of the night market scene, and are usually crowded with shoppers, both local and foreign. The Penang Peranakan Mansion was featured in The Amazing Race 16 and its Asian version of its show The Amazing Race Asia 4. It has also been used to film the Little Nyonya drama series. On November 11, 2011, Bintang Heritage Museum in Tangerang, near Jakarta is open to display mainly about Bintang Chinese uses an old genuine traditional Chinese Peranakan house. And in August 2013, the Museum Peranakan Indonesia was officially opened by the Yayasan Budaya Sayuno Indonesia. The museum is located at the Cheng Ho Museum, next to the Hakka Museum, at the Pavilion of Taman Budaya Sayuno Indonesia, Taman Mini Indonesia in Jakarta, Indonesia. Other Peranakan cultural collections such as batik and beadworks can also be found in museums outside of Southeast Asia. Honolulu Museum of Art and Australian Museum are known to exhibit such collections. Apart from that, exhibition of Peranakan Chitty history, antiques and culture can be seen at the Chitty Museum in Kampung Chitty, Malacca, Malaysia. Recently in 2013, there were controversies of development at the expense of demolishing part of Kampung Chitty, a historical and cultural village. A proposal to construct a condominium, a hotel and a road cutting through the village are seen as a threat affecting the residents, and a temple built in 1827. Political affinity. Baba-Nyonya were financially better off than the China-born Chinese. Their family wealth and connections enabled them to form a Straits Chinese elite, whose loyalty was strictly to Britain or the Netherlands. Due to their strict loyalty, they did not support Malaysian nor Indonesian independence. By the middle of the 20th century, most Peranakan were English or Dutch educated. As a result of the Western colonization of Malaya and Indonesia, Peranakans readily embraced English culture and education as a means to advance economically. Thus administrative and civil service posts were often filled by prominent Straits Chinese. Many in the community chose to convert to Christianity due to its perceived prestige and proximity to the preferred company of British and Dutch. The Peranakan community thereby became very influential in Malacca and Singapore and were known also as the King's Chinese due to their loyalty to the British Crown. Because of their interaction with different cultures and languages, most Peranakans were trilingual, being able to converse in Chinese, Malay, and English. Common vocations were as merchants, traders, and general intermediaries between China, Malaya and the West. The latter were especially valued by the British and Dutch. Things started to change in the first half of the 20th century, with some Peranakans starting to support Malaysian and Indonesian independence. In Indonesia, 3 Chinese communities started to merge and become active in the political scene. They were also among the pioneers of Indonesian newspapers. In their fledgling publishing companies, they published their own political ideas along with contributions from other Indonesian writers. In November 1928, the Chinese weekly Sinpo was the first paper to openly publish the text of the national anthem Indonesia Raya. On occasion, those involved in such activities ran a concrete risk of imprisonment or even of their lives, as the Dutch colonial authorities banned nationalistic publications and activities. Chinese were active in supporting the independence movement during the 1940s Japanese occupation, when all but the so-called Overseas Chinese Association, or residents of Chinese ancestry were banned by the Japanese military authorities. Some notable pro-independence activists were Siojik Tjhan, Liam Koen Hien, and Yap Tjwan Bing, a member of Penisha Persatuan Kemerdekaan Indonesia, who in the 1960s became a citizen of the United States. Current status: Peranakan culture has started to disappear in Malaysia and Singapore. Without colonial British support for their perceived racial neutrality, government policies in both countries following independence from the British have resulted in the assimilation of Peranakans back into mainstream Chinese culture. Singapore classifies the Peranakans as ethnically Chinese, so they receive formal instruction in Mandarin Chinese as a second language instead of Malay. In Malaysia, the standardization of Malay as Bahasa Melayu required for all ethnic groups has led to a disappearance of the unique characteristics of Baba Malay. In Indonesia, the Peranakan culture appears to be losing popularity to modern Western culture, but to some degree the Peranakans are still trying to retain their language, cuisines and customs. Young Peranakans still speak their Creole language, although many young women do not wear the kebaya. Marriages normally follow the Western culture because the traditional Peranakan customs are losing popularity. Only 3 communities of Peranakan still uphold the traditional Peranakan wedding customs: Tangerang, Makassar and Padang. Of the 3 communities, the Sina Bintang people are the most adherent to the Peranakan culture, but their number are dwindling. Sina Bintang people are normally poor people and many seek, or have sought, opportunities in other areas. Some organizations do try to ease their burden of living. As of May 2012, 108 Sina Bintang families are facing eviction from their traditional homes, the reason given by the Tangerang government being that the area they occupy is actually meant as a green space for the city. Most of these families are low income and have nowhere to move to, as the government is not providing enough money for them to relocate. Several traumatic eviction attempts at 2010 and 2011 ended in violence. The migration of some Peranakan families, particularly the well-to-do, has led to a small Peranakan diaspora to neighboring countries, mainly from Vietnam right up to Australia. The 1998 anti-Chinese riots in Indonesia during the fall of Suharto had terrorized many Chinese Indonesians and Peranakans alike, causing Chinese Indonesian communities that are affected by the riots to leave the country. However, these communities are very small, and with the increasing use of the various languages in their respective countries, the use of Peranakan Malay or Baba Malay has been diluted, especially among the younger generation. Current associations of Chinese Peranakan include the Peranakan Association of Singapore, Aspatina, and the Gunung Sayang Association, a performing arts group. The Peranakan Association has about 1,700 members, and the Gunung Sayang Association has about 200 members. Although the Peranakan Association consists of a mix of young and old, the Gunung Sayang Association has primarily elderly or retired members. In Malacca, there is an Indian Peranakan Association known as the Chitti Malacca. This is a tightly knit community of Saivite Hindus. Chitti Peranakans display considerable similarity to Chinese Peranakans in terms of dressing, songs, folk dances and pantun. In popular culture, interest in the Peranakan culture had begun as early as the 1950s with films from Hong Kong such as the Nyangrai/Nyanya, Fenong Nu Shui/Rainstorm in Chinatown, Nyangrai Baba/Nyonya and Baba, and Nyangrai Zilian/Love with a Malaysian Girl. In Malaysia, a comedy drama series, Baba-Nyonya was popular in the 1990s. The series is recognized by the Malaysian Book of Records as the longest-running TV series in the country ever, lasting from the late 1980s till 2000, with 509 episodes in total. Along the passing of the reform era in Indonesia and the removal of the ban on Chinese culture, in 1999, Indonesian writer Remy Salado released a novel called Kabaukan, Hanya Si Bordas Erase the Peranakan Culture and History in Indonesia. The novel was adapted into a film called Kabaukan by Nia Donata in 2002. Riri Riza directed a biographical film on an Indonesian student activist named Sohok Gee, entitled Gee in 2005. The film is based on a Dari Catatan Seorang Demonstran written by Sohok Gee, features a glimpse into the everyday life of an Indonesian Peranakan family in the 1960s. A novel that elevates the history and culture of the Bintang Chinese titled Bonsai, Hikayat Satu Keluarga Sina Bintang written by Pralampita Limbamata and published by Gramedia in 2011. In 2008, a Singaporean drama series The Little Nyonya was aired in Singapore, and later gained popularity in Asia, especially within Southeast Asia region. The filming of the drama took place in Malacca, Penang and Ipoh, Malaysia. In Yasmin Ahmad films Sepit and Gubra has featured Peranakan character as the lead actor's mother played by Peranakan actress Tan Mary Ling. Lead actors from the 1990s Baba-Nyonya series were also featured in Namwi's multi-language and multicultural film, Nasi Lemak 2.0 in 2011, showcasing Peranakan culture. Notable Peranakans Indonesia Agnes Monica, artist, singer. Arif Budiman, also known as Sohok Gee, the older brother of Sohok Gee, Basuki Tjahajar Purnama, politician, Chris John, professional boxer, Kristianto Wibisono, business analyst, Fifi Young, actress, Gaines Thea Santosa, comic author, Hanang Bramantio, film director, Kosin Ki, professional tennis player, Kui Tek Hoi, journalist, novelist, Kui Kian Gi, economist, Coordinating Minister of Economics and Finance, and National Development Planning Minister of Indonesia, Lai Kim Hock, teacher, writer and a social worker of the Dutch East Indies, Liam Swai King, national shuttler, Margaret T., novelist, Mari Pangestu, economist, trade minister, and tourism. And Creative Economy Minister of Indonesia, Myra Jajar, author, daughter of Ethniel, Owait Iong Ham, businessman and founder of the largest conglomerate in the Dutch East Indies, Owait Iong Ham Concern, Phu Keng Hek, social worker and entrepreneur, Rudy Hartano, national shuttler, Sohok Gee, student activist, Susi Susanti, national shuttler, Tanjo Hock, national shuttler, Shiuye Soai, writer and journalist of the Dutch East Indies, TDJ, artist, singer. Malaysia Charles K. Kwa, architect and historian, Malacca, Chi Sui Cheng, founder of Atlas Ice Company. Bahad, Kua Garteng, novelist, Ganeng Seng, Malaccan-born businessman and philanthropist in Singapore and Malaya, Kok Kang Kin, wife of Yap Aloy, the founder of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Nathaniel Tan, politician and writer, Tan Che Yan, rubber plantation merchant and philanthropist, grandson of Tan Tok Seng, Tan Cheng Lok, founder and first president of Malaysian Chinese Association, Tan Sio Sin, third president of Malaysian Chinese Association and first finance minister of Malaysia, son of Tan Cheng Lok, Tan Tok Seng, Malaccan-born merchant and philanthropist in Singapore. Singapore Lee Kuan Yew, first Prime Minister of modern Singapore, Lee Hsien Loong, third Prime Minister of Singapore, Goh Keng Swee, Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore, To Chien Chai, Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore, Lim Kim San, former Cabinet Minister, David Lim Kim San, Head of Music Department in the Ministry of Education, Wee Kim Wee, 4th President of Singapore, Tony Tan, 7th President of Singapore, Dick Lee, celebrity pop singer, composer and playwright, Ganeng Seng, Malaccan-born businessman and philanthropist in Singapore and Malaya, Ivan Heng, actor, Jeanette Orr, Mediacorp artiste, Lim Boon Keng, Penang-born physician and social activist in Singapore, Lim Nay Soon, merchant, Pierre PNG, Mediacorp artiste, Pia Tan, Buddhist writer and teacher, Xiao Po Leng, banker, philanthropist and a committee member of the Straits settlement, Shenzhen Lim, contemporary artist, Song Hoot Kiem, teacher, cashier and a community leader, Sir Songam Siang, lawyer and active citizen of the British colony of Singapore, son of Song Hoot Kiem, Tan Chien Tuan, chairman of OCBC, Tan Kim Ching, politician and businessman, the eldest son of Tan Tok Seng, Tan Kim Sang, Malaccan-born philanthropist and merchant, Tan Tok Seng, Malaccan-born merchant and philanthropist. In Singapore, Walter Woon, lawyer, academic, diplomat, politician and 7th Attorney General of Singapore. See also, Bintang Chinese, Cambodian Hokkien, Chinese Indonesian, Chitty, Jori Peranakan, Malaysian Chinese, Overseas Chinese, Pashu, Sangli, The Little Nyaya. Notes. Further reading, Tong, Lillian. Straits Chinese Gold Jewelry. Malaysia, Penang Peranakan Mansion. Santosa, Iwan. Peranakan Shayuno di Nusantara. Indonesia, Aspatina and Compass Penabit Buku. ISBN 978-979-709-641-0. Key, Mingyit. Lo Hock Seng. Peranakan Chinese Porcelain, Vibrant Festive Wear of the Straits Chinese. Singapore, Tultul. ISBN 0-8048-4007-5. Summers, Mary F. Peranakan Chinese Politics in Indonesia. Singapore, Equinox Publishing. ISBN 6-0283-9735-0. Ho, Wing Meng. Straits Chinese Furniture, A Collector's Guide. Singapore, Marshall Cavendish. ISBN 978-981-261-665-4. Mahmud, Tatin Siri Enden. The Nyaya Kebaya, A Century of Straits Chinese Costume. Malaysia, Periplus Editions. ISBN 0-7946-0273-8. Teo, Kok Song. Peranakan Chinese of Clanton, A Study of the Culture, Language and Communication of an Assimilated Group in Malaysia. Malaysia, Coronet Books Incorporated. ISBN 1-9019-1921-8. Rudolph, Jawan Quartera Gen. Reconstructing Identities, A Social History of the Barbers in Singapore. Singapore, Ashgate Costumes, Ku, Juye. The Straits Chinese, A Cultural History. Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, The Pin Press. ISBN 90-5496-008-6. Chang, Queenie. Memories of a Nyonya. Singapore and Selangor, Malaysia, Eastern Universities Press SDN-BHD. ISBN 9-9717-1145-1. Lee, Chien Koon. Mrs. Lee's Cookbook, Nyonya Recipes and Other Favorite Recipes. Malaysia, SN. ASEAN B0006CNVR6. External links, Bintang Chinese, Barely Indonesian in Invisible People, Poverty and Empowerment in Indonesia, Forbes, Andrew, and Henley, David, Phuket's Historic Peranakan Community, Interactive 360x360-degree VR preview of the Peranakan Museum, the Peranakan Association of Singapore, Asosiasi Peranakan Shayuno Indonesia, Peranakan Association Australia Incorporated, Singapore's Mother Tongue Policy, Petition for a Peranakan Town in Singapore, Penang Peranakan Mansion, Baba-Nyonya House Museum, Malacca, the Inton Museum, Singapore, review over one of the Peranakan in Penang from photo-outing.com, some articles on Peranakan communities in Java, Forbes, Andrew, and Henley. David, Phuket Euro unregistered trademark S Historic Peranakan Community, Peranakan collections from the Peranakan Museum, Singapore.